Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the Applied Games track. My name is Panchami Pradeep. I am your host for this room. Before we start, I would like everybody to settle in and just walk you through all the panels on the right of your screen. We have a Q&A session post the speech or post the talk. Please leave your questions over there so that we can get back to you and we can pick your questions because the speaker is not going to be able to see you. In the handouts bar, we'll be sending you a feedback form, and we request you to please go through it and answer honestly, and this will help us get better talks and better experiences for your next time. Without further ado, let's talk about Austin Davis. Austin Davis is a play experience designer, which means learning through play is a core experience that he is passionate about. It was during his master's at NID that he came across the discipline and discovered the essence of play. Today, he will be talking about creating impact through design and play, and he has been discovering frameworks and how to address design interventions through the same, through play. And this is how he has been a faculty member at his alma mater. Let's bring him on board, and I hope you're all excited.
Hello everyone. I hope I am audible and visible.
Yes, we can.
Cool. Cool. So I'll just start. I'll start sharing my screen. Good. So hi, good evening everyone. My name is Austin, and so for this session, what I'm going to talk about is creating impact through design plus play. Now, although this sounds like a very off-topic thing because this entire conference is about digital games, so I was invited to talk about how there are certain products that we work with, which is not only digital, but of course it's not just toys. Also, we work a lot with physical products, but we try to incorporate not only the concept of play and not only for the purpose of entertainment, but we also look at how we can create an impact through it for other domains also. So without further delaying it, I'll start the presentation. So first of all, I'll talk about our department. So I work as a faculty at a department called Toy and Game Design, which is a design department in National Institute of Design. Our department, our institute, which is the PG campus in Gandhinagar, is based in Gujarat. We offer a master's program in design, which is a 2.5 years long program. So this department was started in 2001, and of course you might be thinking that it's been almost over 20 years, but it's not. It's not that everyone is aware about the department. Only recently people have been coming to know about it. So when this department was started, it was built on the the toy crafts of India. So this was started as a thing by Professor Sudarshan Khanna, who started documenting these interesting folk toys or Mela toys, how we popularly call it. And they started seeing a potential of these products, not just apart from just entertainment, but also seeing how they can contribute a lot to our learning and development, etc. So that is where this concept of starting a department around play came about. So Professor Sudarshan Khanna and my teacher back when I was studying in this department, and also a person who played a prominent role in setting up of the department, Dr. Gayatri Menon. I think both of them played a very important role in setting up the department. So since this department is, we are basically an academic department. I'm sorry if I forgot to mention that. It's a design academic department. The process that we follow here is, of course, design centric because it belongs to the domain of design. But our department being toy and game design, we also have a play centric approach, which we try to align with the design centric approach. And the projects or the kind of courses that we do in NID in toy and game design are very project oriented. So it's more about learning, and that is what most of the assignments or the tasks revolve around. Is basically we take up a challenge and we address it by not only thinking about it on paper but also trying to make it and test it with users and seeing how it whether it connects with what we started off with. So again, though the name of a department is toy and game design, there are the words toy and game, they sort of have a very strong association with certain genres of the market. So every time you hear the word toy, you think about a certain set of products in your mind, and you think that toys are meant for a certain set of things. And similarly for games. But at our department, so the work that started in 2001, they started seeing the potential of using toys in domains outside the purview of just entertainment. And since that time, we have been looking at its application in the area of education, special needs, just spreading awareness and making people know about. It's like basically getting information about a certain thing. Then in the area of health, craft, and of course entertainment, because that naturally is a part of a product like a toy or a game, or whenever you're designing for play, entertainment and fun is naturally a part of it. So what I'm going to talk about today is our way of seeing a product which is a toy or a game. Now here, I'm sure a lot of discussion is happening about digital games, and everyone has a certain outlook towards, for a player, they look at the experience in the game. For a developer, they look at something, and for the company that is making the game, they might be looking at it as a product from a business perspective. So everyone has a way of seeing, and uh, as toy and game design department, we also have a certain outlook at looking at these products of play, which are toys or games or DIY kits or digital games or etc. So the three main aspects within which we look at a product is design, play, and the impact that it creates. And so the process that we follow whenever we are designing a product, um, which involves looking at it from a design lens, from a play lens, and also from an impact lens. So everyone must be very familiar with the design process. And what I am going to talk about today is how we also look at different stages of design or different aspects of design that contribute to like us designing a product. How we also look at play, how we involve play along with the process, and also look at the impact that it creates. So in short, so this is not a specific framework that we, it's not like a Bible that we follow, but in order to explain in order to like touch base with the basic elements that we follow in the process, I thought of sharing this framework with you. Because the projects that we do are quite subjective to the context, and depending upon that, there is always a possibility of that we look at certain aspects which might not be mentioned here. So that varies from project to project, but broadly, these are some of the things that we always look into whenever we are designing or whenever we are taking up a project brief. So the factors that we consider whenever in our design process, let's call it a design and play centric process, is the user, because the person for whom we are designing, and any other stakeholders that are involved. The activity that the user would be doing, because whenever we are talking about play, there is some sort of an interaction. The activity could be interacting with a physical product or a digital interface or a virtual reality product. Then, of course, there's a context. A context would mean that it could either be a product that is meant for user to play at home, or maybe it is for a workplace, or maybe it's for maybe you're booking tickets online, and for that context, how can you introduce play? Then, of course, there is materiality, because when you're making something, there is some sort of a material involvement. And when I say materiality, it's not necessary that it is physical. It can also be the factors that we consider when we are thinking about materiality. It can also be in the digital domain too. And then, of course, purpose. Now, purpose is what is something that makes us push our understanding about the impact of play in areas outside entertainment. So what I'll do is I'll take you through all these individual factors, and how within each factor, what are the things that we consider. But along with that, I will also show you some examples of the work done by students to be able to relate with these factors that I'll talk about. So the first factor is the user. Now, when we consider a user in a design process, one aspect that we look at is the development. Now, you might be thinking that, why to look at development, but the thing with the kind of projects that we do is that even though the name is toy and game, it's not that we only design for children. The user base, the range of the users it goes from 0 to 9900, whatever, till death. So the age range is so big that we have to understand the user for whom we are making, the kind of capabilities that the user has, and what they can do and cannot do. Because we might design something for a teenager, it's not necessary that the same thing will work for like a 5-year-old kid. Of course, it could also, but there are certain things that might not. So those kind of considerations become very important when we are designing. And from a play lens, so yeah, this is what I'll be doing. All my slides are going to be in this format. So I'll talk about certain design factors and certain play factors for the design process element that we are discussing. So when we are talking about user from a play perspective, we make sure that the play is age appropriate. Now, why age appropriateness? Because again, coming back to the same factor that certain games or any play activity which has a challenge might be which is enjoyable by a 5-year-old might not be enjoyable by a 20-year-old, because they might expect a play activity which is much more challenging. So accordingly, in our study, we make sure that we address this factor of understanding that for the age for which we are designing, what kind of play relates with that age. So this is an example of a product. So you would have seen a lot of products in the market that address motor skills, hand motor skills. Now this was a product to address oral motor skills. Now the interesting part about this product was that it actually started as a product that was intended for children who have speech development issues. And for improving speech development, there are certain exercises, like, for example, when we are drinking water, the muscles of the mouth that are engaged in that, and even while, if I'm blowing a candle, so the muscles that get involved in that, those kind of muscle movements help also in the development of speech. So understanding those attributes from a child development specialist, this game was designed by one of the students, which is around these kind of movements. And so, like, again, coming back to the interesting part is, usually when we design products for special needs, it sort of becomes a very niche product and becomes expensive because it is only meant for a certain audience. So here the product was made inclusive, that even if it is not meant for development, any typical child would also enjoy playing with it. So this was a product designed for around the age of 4 and 5 and above. Basically, the challenge was that you have to move a character in the design path, and it also has a story around it. And while doing that, you are developing all these muscle developments, which can later on help in your speech development too. So the other thing that we look at when we are studying users is their likes and dislikes, which becomes necessary because whenever we are designing something for a user, we need to understand their preferences, what sort of narratives and themes that they would be interested in, and of course, if there is something trending, and we would definitely like to, be part of it. And from a play perspective, it is important to understand the likes and dislikes, because role playing and narratives is a very key element of play. So whenever you're designing, so it is obviously, you can always design a product that does not have a backstory, but having a backstory or having a narrative element into it creates a very strong engagement with the product. which is something that I am sure everyone agrees with here who are attending this conference, because in every game you always have a narrative element. But for some games, maybe the narrative element sort of sets up a context, but maybe it's not very strongly involved with the play activity happening. But there are many games where the narrative and the play, whatever activity interaction happening, is very cohesively, they are well gelled together. So this is a project that was done to promote, as in taking inspiration from stories from our culture and mythology. There were these small online games that were developed. So this was done like some time back when Flash gaming was quite popular. So this was supposed to be these website games, but centered around the topic of Indian culture and mythology in order to promote them through stories and through these games, because games become, so these were digital games, and these become such a popular way of telling a story. And when you interact with the story by doing actions and playing the role of a character, these stories stay with you, and that is the advantage of using play. And of course, designing keeping in mind the trends, it sort of makes a stronger impact. Then, when we study the user, we also look at the needs of the user, which again, in many cases, whenever products are designed, a lot of people might not be looking into need. They might just be designing something that is again like probably meant for entertainment, or like I said, everyone has their way of seeing a product. So we always consider this factor. So from a design perspective, it helps us in understanding that are there any concerns that we can address. It also helps us in understanding opportunities for coming up something for basically designing something new. And instead of reinventing the wheel, you can always figure out, okay, there is a gap or an opportunity where you can design more, and or to improve something that is already existing, and you can to give a better experience. Now from a play perspective, it how play contributes to addressing a user's need is that play has this element of engagement. Whenever you are playing, you engage with it. It is very voluntary. No one forces you to play. If you are in that mode of play, like they talk about being in that flow, you're sort of engaging with the content and whatever activity that is being done. So that helps. That sort of makes it easy for us to design a product if it is playful. The engagement factor makes sure that the need gets addressed. And of course, the benefit of play being that it has multiple formats. There are different, like different types of mechanics, different types of materials that you can work with. It can be a digital or a physical product. So different formats and different mediums. So that gives us like loads of possibilities to come up with ideations to address a certain need. On the right side, you can see this image. So one of the students had decided to work with the school, and so while studying, while doing a research with the school, she identified that evaluation, or the part where the tests happen in schools, are always a situation of stress, and it is something that no one likes. So she took this up as a challenge to see if any component of evaluation can be made more fun. So of course, we can't replace tests and exams because they are part of that would require maybe more policy level interventions. But what she did was trying to question the intention of evaluation. Which is basically to understand the strength of a student or areas where improvement needs to happen. So keeping that in mind, she developed this game for the teachers, through which the teachers can conduct activities with students which would test their understanding of a subject. And the kind of results that come out was mapped in such a way that it gives the teacher an idea about where are they lacking, or what sort of improvements is needed. Because as a teacher, it might become difficult for a teacher to to keep track of each and every student. So there would be a minimum of 35 students in the class. So this sort of makes it easy, because not only does the teacher also get to know, but a student can also learn from other students because they come together and they're playing games. So this was an interesting opportunity that was identified by a student when they looked at when they studied the need for in the context of a school. So yeah, so those are like some of the factors when we look at a user. The next aspect of the design process is the activity that we design. So in an activity, of course, we look at the kind of challenge that we are providing or going to provide when we are designing. So from a design perspective, the challenge should be something that is intuitive, because since we are working in the domain of toys and games, if it can't be like an instruction manual for an electronic device that you buy from the market where you have, 10,000 steps that you have to read. The more intuitive it is, the more fun or the more engaging the product can become. So it should be the challenge, whatever is the challenge that is created, it should be easy to understand. And the interaction, of course, also needs to be looked into. So that, every choice that you make, let's say if it's a digital game, so where do you place a click, or what sort of hand gesture do you do for a jump, or maybe for attacking, or maybe for collecting something, because all these small decisions go a long way in adding value to the experience. And so coming back to the challenge aspect of it, again from a play perspective, you look at the kind of difficulty that you can give. Like I was mentioning earlier, a person would. So why would a person take up a challenge? Again, it will also depend upon the age and the nature of the person. So some might expect the challenge to be more logical and cognitive, or more strategy. So the kind of difficulty and the type of challenge that you introduce into the product defines the kind of play experience that can be created. Again, so you will notice that I will keep on talking about the previous topics also, because ultimately everything is overlapped. It's not that user is in isolation, activities in isolations. Everything is very interlinked. So we are looking at all of them, but not in a linear fashion, but more in connection to each and everything. Then, of course, you have a learning curve. You try to create the curiosity, and the challenge that is created in the activity should also have a lot of variety. Otherwise, if done once, how do you get the user to come back to the product again? So the example that is there on the right was a product that was inspired from geometric shapes. So like the product that has been made sort of creates different challenges as you rotate every layer, and for every layer there's some sort of a geometric shape that gets created, and then you have to identify which blocks fits into it. So this sort of the other intention around this product is also to develop an understanding of 3D forms, and also develop 3D visualization and strategic thinking and logical thinking. So somewhere to address that, but through the concept of 3D shapes. So in an activity, you look at challenge, and in every activity, there is always some sort of a learning that can happen. So from a design perspective, you can address that learning by working on its content and the way you engage with the content. Now, how you engage with the content can be defined by the kind of play experience you create, the choice of the mechanic, the choice of the theme, and what sort of learning component are you adding into the product. So all this can address the learning aspect of activity. So the product that you see on the right was a product that was designed to teach children about healthy eating choices, but through a game. So in the game, so the mechanics has been designed in such a way, like I said, the choice of the mechanic ensures the kind of learning that can happen. So you have to make the right combinations of food, and there was a component there where you actually go and make the food also. So this was done based on looking at what are the materials that are usually readily available in the home, so you can actually make those health drinks and all this kind of stuff. Another component of activity is the kind of feeling that you can create when you design an activity. So, so from a design perspective, in every activity there is some sort of emotion. You can so the kind of imagination that it triggers, because just like in digital games also, there are some games which are very relaxing, some that keep you on the edge of the seat, and which not necessarily because they are horror games, but they could also be in the category of action. But there is always a certain emotion that gets created when you are interacting with that sort of a product. So keeping this in mind, the immersion factor in the play can also be improved by creating a fantasy world, and this is where the storytelling part can also play a strong role. So this was an interesting experiment done by one of our students. She decided to make these very abstract shapes. So usually you have like doll houses where everything is very specific. You know, this is a house, this is a bed, this is a table. So instead of that, she made these abstract shapes and gave it to a child, and the child was making up stories and imagining every shape to be a certain product. So this sort of opens up the possibility of imagining and role playing, and depending upon the kind of experiences that the student or the child looks at around them. So they start creating stories. So which was a very interesting activity or a toy, whatever you might want to call it, which led to imaginative storytelling. So the next aspect that I will talk about is the context. Now, again, context is, like I said, there are many projects which are very subjective. So the context can also keep on varying. But the context, understanding where the product will be played or in which situation, which scenario, that is also something that we consider when we are designing. For example, let's say if you're looking at a public space. So from a design perspective, we have to keep in mind that there are going to be multiple kinds of users. Now here you cannot restrict your user. Of course, there might be possibility like in like maybe in a school, which is much more specific, not where there might be limited number of users. But I'm actually talking about a public space where there can be a bigger range. So you have to consider that factor into mind. Again, you have to consider inclusivity, the durability of the product, because it's in the open, and you have to make sure that it is long lasting and it will be handled by people in different ways. And how play contributes to public spaces, that there are so many types of play, there is so much variety that you can offer whenever you're designing for play. So that sort of helps in designing a playful experience in a public space, that so that you can create a lot of variety. So this example on the right side is, so there was an interesting project that was done by the 2018 batch of Fine Game Design, where they were approached by a mental health institute in Ahmedabad, and they requested to set up a inclusive playground. And when they said inclusive, they meant that whatever they had designed, what happened was only the children with special needs, they would interact with it, but when others who would also visit the campus, they won't participate in it because they don't find it that playful. So they wanted to design a playground which would be equally playful for both of them. But again, the other thing that we had to address was that it also caters to their developmental needs. So this was a project done where we collaborated with a playground equipment manufacturing company, and they decided to set up a playground. So whatever was designed by the students, it was manufactured by the company and it was set up in that institute. So again, so whenever designing for public space, these are the kind of things that we keep in mind. So the context can also be a workspace. So when I say workspace, not necessarily offices, but much more controlled spaces, like a school or maybe an office or maybe a hospital, where it's not necessarily like an open public space. So there, whenever you're designing something, so in a public space, how you have to look at multiple users. In a workspace, you have to look at multiple stakeholders. You have to keep in mind the ambience of the space. For example, if I come up with a playful experience in an office where everyone is working and the result of the play experience is a lot of noise and hoo-ha, then that is going to really spoil the ambience. So that has to be kept in mind. Space constraints have to be kept in mind. From a play perspective, you can address all these things by carefully choosing the mechanic, the rules of engagement, and the format of the game. For example, this was again for education. The project was about bringing in like a playful approach towards learning within a classroom. Now, during discussions with the teachers, what came about was that they were very reluctant of bringing in a lot of toys or too much play, which is not controlled. Because as soon as children get into the mode of play, it is very difficult to keep them in control and also align with the academic that is going on. Because ultimately, the objective of teachers, which is who are a very important stakeholder in this domain, is to teach. So that has to be kept in mind. So this was a book that was created in which you enter information based on your learning, and that information turns into cards, and those cards then turn into a game which can be played inside the class, just for a period of 5 minutes in every class in the beginning, which sort of tests you on your knowledge and creates a playful environment, and everyone participates in it. Um, then there is materiality. Of course, the choice of material, that it has to be safe, because in play, because as play is something that instantly engages you with the product if it is playful. So you have to be very careful about the safety factor, because again, play also deals with across ages. It is for children, special needs, elderly. Whenever you're designing for these domains, it is much more important to consider safety. So this was a prototype of a playground equipment for schools, which is inspired from trees, where you can do hanging and sitting and climbing and all those kind of things. Then, of course, the choice of material with respect to manufacturing, from a design perspective, you have to keep in mind the cost, the fact that what is going to happen with the material, is it going to be thrown away? So if you can keep that in mind, the durability of the material, because again, depending upon the kind of play you're designing for, uh, just like any product, that also needs to last. From a play perspective, what we do is we also try to explore the play property of a material. So it's not just that we try to design a product that is functional and moves in certain way. Sometimes we see a material. We could even, so there have been projects where students have also worked with, just water as a material and how to design play around it. So this was a very interesting project done by a student who took up cardboard as a material to develop low cost DIY kit activities, and the output that came out was phenomenal, because there was so much possibility of the kind of forms that could be created, which also led to the possibility of creating new stories and role playing, and in that domain. Then, of course, the experience, which gets created because of the form, the texture, the multi-sensory aspect, which is sort of common for both play as well as design. This was a project where we had to design toys as merchandising products for a show that was going to come out. So the show was about underwater animals for kids for the age of 4 to 5. So these products were made from fabric as well as wood. It was a mix of two materials, which sort of imitates those characters, and has some interactions where you can remove the face from one character and place it into another. Then, of course, comes purpose. Uh, Again, purpose can also be multifold till now. So I'm just going to take you through some of the domains where we have worked with some examples. For example, craft. Now, craft is something that is very close to NID, and especially our department, because our department is set up. It is coming from there. Um, so whenever we are designing for a purpose, the one important point that I want to bring into this place is that whenever we talk about games, we always try to achieve the maximum degree of playfulness. But whenever we are trying to address a purpose and also using play, it is okay um, to have the degree of playfulness can be slightly less. It might not be as playful, as a Nerf gun. But at the same time, there is some amount of play which sort of addresses a purpose also. So this is something that we work with. We always try to balance. We don't compromise the need by adding play value, and at the same time, just to address the need, we don't compromise on the play totally. But we try to address. We make sure of as much of play we can bring into the picture. So I'll just quickly wrap up my presentation, because I think I'm also running out of time. So this was a top. You have all seen traditional tops made of wood. So the student cleverly introduced a small electronic component on the top, which is sort of an LED strip. And when you rotate and switch it on, it makes all these different patterns. So as soon as this component was introduced, without really compromising the culture of the craft or their process of making it, it sort of added more value to it. And there was an interesting narrative, because this was done in Ahmedabad. So whenever we have this event of Garba, where when people dance, the kind of the forms that get made, because everyone is moving in a circular fashion, there are different patterns which also resembles the dances that we are done in Garba. Then, of course, information. So this was a game that was designed by a student for spreading awareness of a space program by interacting with various mechanics in the game. So again, the design factors are content. Sorry for the spelling mistake. The interface, the visuals, all these play a key role in adding information or spreading awareness about the topic that you have taken up. And through narratives and theme and the kind of choices that you make in the game, also you learn a lot of things. Um, from a health perspective, so I'll directly talk about the product. So this was a product that was made for kids who might have delays in cognitive development. So this is an inclusive AR toy where through these blocks, when you see these blocks through a phone and the application, there are these animations that come in on the phone, and then you can create stories. Now, what happens? The inclusivity factor here is that even for a kid who has some cognitive development delays, can use it for their development, and a typical child can also play with it because it is equally engaging. So it sort of addresses both the needs. Yeah, so that was, I'm sorry for rushing to the end part. So, like overall, these are the factors that we look into when we are talking about the design, play, plus impact process. So, we look at user, activity, context, materiality, and purpose. But ultimately, if you want to make true impact, for that we have to collaborate. It is not just that one person can. Of course, one person can do everything, but for I think for addressing a larger need, it is very important that makers and designers and even users come together onto a table and think about ideas and co-create design solutions. So this is one example. I would like to end my presentation with this example where students of SET, which is an architecture college, decided to work with some slums where they wanted to introduce some design interventions for improving their whatever concerns that they had addressed. And from NID, the department, we participated in developing board games as a design thinking tool. And what happened was that the architecture students made those games. They took those games to the slums, played with the people there, all types of stakeholders, the people who were facing issues, the people who were causing the issues. It was very amazing because all of them came together and they started discussing. And during that interaction, because of the game, because it created that sort of an environment, they were able to co-create design solutions. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, thank you so
Yeah.
much for the presentation. I think we have a couple of questions. I personally have a lot of questions, so many keywords stood out. And this will be really interesting to have like a conversation about. Just to remind everybody, please send in your questions in the Q&A panel. Austin, if you check the Q&A
Mm.
panel as well, you will see the questions that you have. I think Sarah has a couple of questions too. You can start um, with whichever you would like.
Okay. ठीक है, I'll just read question here. When designing for kids, how do you bridge the gap between user needs and the consumer needs, what parents expect? So like I said, whenever we are, this basically happens in the initial research process. So let's say we are designing an educational toy for a kid. So during that time, not only will we interact with the kid, of course, the kid will never say that I want an educational toy. They will talk about what is it that they love to do. They might talk about aliens or underwater theme or maybe, fantasy, monsters and those kind of things. So we'll take that data. We'll talk to parents. Parents might say, we want something that makes sure that the kid learns something. So we have to consider that too. We can't really say, ki, nahi, it should not happen. But then again, so I am remembering one example that one of my students had given. It should not be like chocolate on broccoli. So that is not the sort of combination that we do when we are designing toy. But we consider, basically we get the information, and based on that we develop certain um, design points to consider before we are designing the solution. And keeping all those things in mind, then we go ahead. So it's basically collecting information and keeping that in mind. So talking to people and conducting that kind of a research. So
Right.
yeah.
Thank you. The next question is by Jay. What are the toy publishing companies in India if you want to make toys for kids commercially?
Well, I think there is a robust toy association group in Bombay and Delhi, and even now in I think even down south, there are also a lot of things coming up. So I think the information is out there. If you go to the Toy Association website, also you can find a lot of people, a lot of manufacturers who are making products for kids.
All right. The next question is for me. Next couple of questions are for me. Something that you mentioned was developing toys or interactables for people with special needs. This was fascinating to me because, especially for children who have autism, you have augmented and alternative communication devices. So how would the design process and play, as you have mentioned, work with designing um, an element like that or a device like that?
So again, adding to what I had mentioned earlier, so here we first of all we start with understanding the developmental need, for which of course you do a lot of secondary reading, you read books and you understand the topics from online. But then you also do interact with a specialist who works in that domain because they give a lot of insights which is first hand and which is much more well informed also. Uh, After that, so the biggest challenge when we are designing for, let's say, children with special needs is that they will never come up and tell you what problems they are facing. So what we do here is we go with certain products that we have made. It could either be toys, or maybe we just do a quick ideation and a quick prototyping of some play activities. We interact with the kids and we do a lot of observation. So this observation is also, of course, defined by the previous study that we have already done, and we already have some sort of an idea of what are the things that we need to consider. So, for example, let's say if there is an intention of calming down a kid for a certain developmental requirement. So for there, we will, of course, do some sort of activities and we try to understand how do they react or when do they get more, are they getting hyper or what is it that is triggering them. So we try to understand all these things by interacting with directly with the kids, but also talking to specialists and also talking to caretakers and other people who are working in that domain.
All right. I think you've already answered the next question, which would be how would you go about pitching for a new concept for toy development?
So this again, I think you find the right person, the right publisher.
Yeah, yes. I think the last question for today would be how does one measure replayability?
Hmm. Well, for someone who has a lot of experience, I think they can just look at a product and tell whether there will be a replayability factor, but that is purely based on experience. The other thing that you can do is always try it out, give it to users. I think that is the best way of finding an answer to this question, that whether your product is replayable or not. You give it to the kid will. So again, I'm going back to an experience of one of my students who said that he had designed a game for the tablet, and it was supposed to be an educational game, and he thought it was mind blowing, बहुत ही सही game. And when the game was given to a kid, the kid he just looked at the game. No, I don't want to play this. It got
Right,
rejected there and then, and that is the best way to know.
right,
So yeah, I think otherwise I don't. Uh, the rest comes from experience that you might have some sort of set criteria that if this is not happening, this will definitely not be replayable. But there is no such set framework, this fixed framework.
right. There, with that answer, I have like this mixed feelings. Like, children can be so brutally honest with their opinions. So, all game designers and developers out there, that's a tip to learn. The creativity or the chance of somebody picking up your game is equivalent to a child's interest in your game. That immediate interest, right? Um, Thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining the panel. I just wanted to remind everybody. Oh, there's another question by Dao Khan. How do you see difference between materiality of digital and physical play, especially in context of children?
Hmm. Um, well, apart from the obvious differences of the experience that you get, um, well, I don't know how to answer that. Malab. A digital game is a digital game, and physical when you're interacting with a physical product. So, well, let me put it in this way, that if you're designing something for a certain medium,
Mhm.
we try to observe the kind of interactions that are possible. So, for example, the kind of actions and activities that I can do with, let's say, a ball in the physical environment are very different from what I can do with a ball in a virtual environment. So we try to understand the kind of interactions that are possible, but of course in the digital world, because depending upon the medium, whether it's an AR or a VR thing, so the interaction would vary. I think somewhere that also connects with materiality. That is one difference that I can think of that you can look into when you're looking at both the mediums. And
All right.
again, children, when you talk about children, again, I would always go back to research. That becomes part of the process.
Yeah.
We try to understand what do they do with that medium, and what kind of products are there in the market. We try to take some things to them, and we see how we observe a lot and try to see how they interact with it, and we get a lot of insights from there.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you, Austin. I think this was like a really insightful talk. To everybody in the audience, please go to the handouts page and fill the form and provide us feedback. This will help us give better talks. This is just, it'll be very validating for Austin, for us. It'll be just something really happy to know. If you would like to connect with the speaker afterwards, you can connect to through the lounge. It's on your left side. So if you move towards there, you can speak to the speaker for longer. I think we have one more question and then we have a time check. What do
Okay.
you think the best rewards are for children in games?
Again, rather than focusing on a specific component, like I said, we try to understand their likes and dislikes. So, for example, if someone is interested, let's say, in food, so in the game, let's say if the like the virtual reward that you're getting is some sort of a food item, that kid would associate with that element more. But again, I think overall it again goes back to the stage of doing research and understanding what sort of narratives interest them, what sort of themes interest them, and I think that will give you an answer of what sort of a reward to give. And of course, rewards also depend a lot on the story and the narrative that you have built into your game or into your product. Um, yeah.
All right. Thank you, everyone. There's also a next talk that is Games as the 21st Century Classroom from UNESCO. So if you'd like to talk to the speaker, please move to the lounge or move to the next room, and we will see you there. Thank you and good evening.
Okay. Thank you.